To buy gold, in-game items, or boosting services in Diablo 4, check out the links in the description and use code NICO for 5% off. Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Diablo 4 and we're going to be doing the first build guide we have. And I'm going to be going basically through each class, so I'm just going to be starting with Barbarian for today. And so this build guide is one that I think works rather well for leveling, so you can just power through, start at level 1 and just work your way up through this guide. Or if you're already at the end game, you can reset your stats or your skill points and spec into this build, and it will work really well either way. So it works very, very well as a leveling build and as an end game build, and it's been great for me so far. So let's just get into it. So this is a Whirlwind build that is also going to somewhat play into the whole Barbarian's Barb ability, so the translating incoming damage into outgoing damage. That is less so, it's more about that Whirlwind potential, but the Barb will be useful here and there. As far as stats go, like I said, you can either do this as an endgame or level up through it, but when you start in your first area here, the one we're going to want to put time and effort into is Lunging Strike. We just want to put 1 into there, and then we want to do 1 into Enhanced Lunging Strike. And that's just to get us past this first tier, because most of these intro skills aren't really going to be all that useful for this build. Once we get into our second area here, this is where we're going to start actually spending some points. So obviously, like I said, this is a Whirlwind build, so we're going to want to put points into Whirlwind. I recommend all 5, so you have Whirlwind up as high as you can go here. And then once you've got those 5 into Whirlwind, then we're going to want to put 1 into Enhanced Whirlwind and 1 into Violent Whirlwind. Both of those are going to be very useful. Violent Whirlwind says after using Whirlwind for 2 seconds, Whirlwind does 30% increased damage until it's cancelled. So this one, the longer you use Whirlwind, the more damage it does, which is very useful, especially considering the main point of using the Whirlwind build is to take out large groups of enemies, and that's how this is going to be the most effective. And so it's better in long bursts than in short bursts. After that, we've got this skill over here to the side called Pressure Point. This one increases your lucky hit, so your core skills have a up to a 30% chance, and that's upgraded all the way to level 3, to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. This is going to help because it says right below, vulnerable enemies take 20% increased damage. This one's going to make all of your core skills have that increased chance to make them vulnerable, and then they're going to take more damage. So this one's going to be great with that increased damage that you're trying to deal. Then we're going to move on to the third area, and here we're going to start doing our shouts, which is another big part of this build. So the first one we're going to do is Rallying Cry. You don't need to put a lot of points into this one. If you, for some reason, had a bunch after the end of the build or whatever, you won't, but if you did, then it wouldn't hurt to put more in there. But we really only need 1 in there so we can get Rallying Cry. Rallying Cry, it says bellow a Rallying Cry, increasing your movement speed by 30% and resource generation by 40% for 7.4 seconds, and nearby allies for 3.7 seconds. This one is pretty useful. It will help you and the people around you, so if you're a raid leader, this one is going to help with that. But it also is just going to make you go faster and help your resource generation go up, so it's useful for both of those. After you've got the 1 in Rallying Cry, then we're going to want to do Enhanced Rallying Cry, which says grants you Unstoppable while active, and unstoppable characters have all control impairing effects removed and prevented. So if you've got this one going, you're not going to be getting tied down or stopped or anything like that because you're unstoppable, so it's very useful. And then we're going to want to do Tactical Rallying Cry, which generates 20 Fury and grants you an additional 20% resource generation. It's just going to make your Rallying Cry more effective, and since we're going for that increased Fury and increased resource generation so we can keep our Whirlwind going longer, Tactical Rallying Cry is perfect for that. Then in this same area, we're going to want to do Challenging Shout. This one we are going to want to put 5 points into because it just gets more and more useful the more you put into here, and that's important for this one. So this one says taunt nearby enemies and gain 48% damage reduction for 7.9 seconds. This one's going to taunt enemies around you, kind of makes them come and attack you, which makes it easier to take out large groups all at once, and it's also going to reduce the damage that you take, so you're going to take almost 50% less damage on this one. And then after you've got your 5 points into there, we want Enhanced Challenging Shout. So while Challenging Shout is active, gain 20% bonus maximum life. This one just makes you have more life. Tactical Challenging Shout. While Challenging Shout is active, you gain 3 Fury each time you take damage. So this one kind of flips it over the other ones that we've been doing, and it's going to help us gain more Fury again, but this time it's going to be for incoming damage. So like I said, it kind of plays into that Barb aspect for a little bit there, but it's just another thing that's going to help us generate more Fury and keep our Whirlwind going longer. Moving down into the fourth cluster, we have War Cry, which is our next shout that we're going to want to get. This one, again, we're just going to need to unlock it, so we just need 1 point into this one, and it says Bellow a Mighty War Cry, increasing your damage dealt by 15% for 7.4 seconds, and to nearby allies for 3.7 seconds. So this is another one that helps you and the people with you. This one is just going to increase the damage that you deal, and that 15% is a pretty noticeable chunk, so it's useful. But like I said, we really only need that first one. Then we're going to want to do Enhanced Warcry. So Warcry grants you Berserking for 4 seconds, and Berserking grants 25% increased damage and 15% increased movement speed. So that one is going to, again, increase your damage output and increase the speed that you can move at, which is great for Whirlwind because it's a very mobile skill. Then we want to do Power Warcry. So it says if at least 6 enemies are nearby when you cast Warcry, your damage bonus is increased by an additional 10%. And so like I said, since the point of this build is mostly against groups of enemies, it's oftentimes going to be against more than 6. So this is going to give you another 10% damage increase on top of what you've already gotten, which is that 15% with the base one. So Warcry is super useful, and that's how you want to upgrade it. In the same cluster, we're going to do Booming Voice next, and we're going to do all 3 points into this one because it's just going to increase the duration of our shouts, and that's going to be useful for most of the skills that we've been doing so far. So if you do it up to level 3, you get that increased 24%. Then on top of Booming Voice, we're going to want Raid Leader. So that one says your shouts also heal allies for 3% of their maximum life per second. This is another reason why the Barbarian makes a really good Raid Leader, because you can use these skills, and every time you use these shouts, it's going to be healing your party. So that's going to be super useful. Next, over here in this, on the right side of this cluster, we have Swiftness. This one's another obvious one that we're going to want to increase because it's going to help us with our movement speed, and upgrading it to level 3 is going to give us a 12% boost to that, which is very useful. Then down at the bottom for this cluster, we have Aggressive Resistance. This one says gain 9% damage reduction while berserking. This one again is upgraded to level 3, and so all of our berserking that we do with some of the other skills that we've been focusing on so far, doing Aggressive Resistance up to level 3 is going to give us 9% damage reduction while doing that. And then we want Prolific Fury, same thing, all the way up to level 3, and this one says while berserking, Fury generation is increased by 18%. So now we're reducing our damage some more while we're berserking, and we're increasing our Fury generation. So both of those skills upgraded to level 3 are excellent. Moving down into the next cluster, we have Pit Fighter. That's another one we're going to want to focus on. And so get this one up to level 3. It says you deal 9% increased damage to close enemies and gain 6% distant damage reduction. So this one's great for the Barbarian because you're not a ranged unit. You do all of your damage up close, and your biggest weakness is enemies that are far away because you do that. So getting Pit Fighter up to level 3 makes you deal more damage to those close to you and take less damage from those far away from you. Then we want No Mercy. It's right above Pit Fighter. We want that to level 3 too because that one gives us a 9% increased critical strike chance and against immobilized, stunned, or slowed enemies, which is something we're going to do a lot with this build. And so that's just going to make us have a much higher critical strike percentage, which is going to make us deal more damage. So another obvious one to get to level 3. Then we have Hamstring, which is just going to say your bleeding effects slow enemies by 10%. This one we want just 1 level in, and it's so we can slow enemies every time we cause bleed, and that's going to play into No Mercy, which is going to make us deal more critical strike against slowed enemies, so you can see how those two play off each other. We don't need 3 into here because this is not a bleed build, so don't waste extra points on it, just 1 point for Hamstring. And then we have Thick Skin. This one's another one we just want to put 1 point into, and it says each time you take direct damage, gain 0.4% base life as Fortify. This one's useful. It helps you heal as you take damage, so like I said, it plays into the barb aspect. But really the reason we want this is so that we can get 3 points into Defensive Stance, which is a more useful skill. And so this one says increase the damage reduction gained while you are fortified by an additional 6%. So this time, anything that fortifies you, which we're going to do a lot by, using our shouts and other abilities in this build, this one's going to help us take less damage. So the Defensive Stance we do want to put 3 points into. Moving down into our ultimate section, we have 3 points into Heavy-Handed. So while using two-handed weapons, you deal 15% increased critical strike damage. The reason for this is because this build is a two-handed weapons build. You pretty much are just always using your two-handed weapon. And so this one's going to give you that increased critical strike damage. It's an obvious choice. Definitely put 3 points into that bad boy. And for our ultimate skill, we're going to have Wrath of the Berserker. This one we're just going to put the 1 point into because that's all there is. And Wrath of the Berserker says explode into rage, knocking back surrounding enemies and gaining berserking and unstoppable for 5 seconds. For the next 10 seconds, dealing direct damage with basic skills grants berserking for 5 seconds. So the thing about this is, you've noticed all the times that we've had things that enhance your ability when you're either unstoppable or berserking. Well, this one makes you both of those, and every time you deal direct damage, while you have this skill active, it's going to increase that berserking for 5 seconds. So even after Wrath of the Berserker wears out, and like you've used up your active time with Wrath of the Berserker, you're still going to be berserking for time because usually you've built up quite a bit of time for berserking because of the damage that you've been dealing. So you're going to berserk for a long time after Wrath of the Berserker. So it's very useful. It's an excellent skill, and if you're doing the Whirlwind build, it's the best way to go for your ultimate. Then we're going to want to upgrade to Prime Wrath of the Berserker. So while Wrath of the Berserker is active, gain gain 20% increased movement speed and increased fury generation by 30%. It's just another upgrade that's going to make us move faster and generate more fury. And then Supreme Wrath of the Berserker says, while Wrath of the Berserker is active, every 50 fury you spend increases Berserk's damage bonus by 25%. So this one is going to go with our Whirlwind. So the more we're doing the Whirlwind, we're spending more of that fury. We're going to make our Berserk's damage go up. So the longer you go and the more fury you spend, the more damage you're going to deal. So it just stacks on top of it. And then for our last skill point that we have, we're going to want to go with Unbridled Rage. And that one says core skills deal 135% increased damage, but cost 100% more fury. So like I said, a lot of people ignore Unbridled Rage because they don't like seeing that things cost 100% more fury. But if you do it right, the more fury you use, the more damage you deal. And so you can take out huge bosses or giant groups of enemies really quickly with this build. Some other aspects of this build to consider just for priorities and all that sort of stuff. One thing we're going to want to do is focus on our two-handed axe expertise as for our active expertise on this one, just because it's going to benefit the build the most. So it says when using a two-handed axe, 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, 10% increased critical strike chance against vulnerable enemies. So this one, since in this build we make enemies vulnerable a lot, this one is going to do more damage and increase our critical strike. So that's the expertise that you want to focus on for this build, and the one that you want to keep equipped. And with that in mind, that means that over on your right side, we're going to want to focus on having the best axe, the best two-handed axe possible, because that's the weapon that we're going to primarily be using. For what to slot on your weapons and armor, it's actually pretty universal for this build. I recommend doing rubies on as many slots of your armor as you have, because they're going to increase your maximum life, which is going to be really useful for your tankiness and survivability on this. Now, obviously, not everything can be slotted or even upgraded to be slotted, but if you have it, I put the rubies on there. For all of our weapons, we're going to want to put sapphires into there so we can increase our critical damage. So you can see that with the standard sapphire, so the third level of sapphire, we get a plus 9% critical strike damage to crowd-controlled enemies for every sapphire slotted in there, and that's going to be useful because it's going to help our crits go up. And then for our jewelry, the obvious thing is skulls. So if we pop our skulls in there, you can see for the the third level of skull, we get plus 170 armor for each one of those pieces of jewelry that we have on. So those are the things that you're going to want to slot. As for like what stats or what perks to prioritize with everything, I'll just go down the list. For your two-handed weapon, you're going to want to max out vulnerability damage, critical damage, strength, and any high damage, like any high percentage damage roll that you can maximize out of any of these weapons. For our gloves, we're going to want to look for certain things. Anything that increases your whirlwind is going to be great with your gloves because that's going to be a huge part of this build. But after that, any increased critical chance or strength or lucky hit is also going to be super useful. Obviously, your base armor is important too because it keeps your tankiness up and helps protect you, but those are kind of going to be what we look for there. For your amulet, anything that helps your movement speed or defensive skills or any sort of fury cost reduction or a cooldown reduction, anything like that. And that's going to kind of be the truth with most of your stuff. On here, those things are always going to be useful for this build. For your rings, anything that increases your vulnerability damage or critical damage again, critical chance, max HP, stuff like that is going to be super useful. For your helm, again, max life, strength, any other big stat increases are going to be useful on this one. Chest, we're again going to be focusing on a damage reduction from close quarters because, like I said, that's mostly what we focus on here. And damage reduction while fortified, damage reduction in general, and anything that's going to help with challenging shout, so that's going to be important there. Our legs, again, damage reduction while fortified, damage reduction from bleeding, damage reduction from close quarters combat, or just damage reduction in general. Those are going to want to be what we focus on. And finally, boots, movement speed increases are important for this build, damage reduction while injured, dodge, and fury cost reduction. So any sort of stuff you can do like that is going to be super, super useful. As for aspects, and now I don't know if I feel like most people are pretty familiar with the way aspects work in this game, but the vast majority of them you collect from completing dungeons around the map. And so if you're looking at that, it's these little grates. The first time you complete them on your account, you'll unlock an aspect from them. And so there are quite a few of them all around the world, as you can see from the aspects. There are 115 total, and I've got 107 of them. And a lot, pretty much all of these, if not, well, not all of them, but most of them are build specific or class specific. For the Barbarian build, you can see that there's significantly less. But anyway, you do want to focus on getting some aspects on your suits of armor that are going to match, and we can just go down the list. For your helm, the best aspect that we can hope for is going to be your aspect of grasping Whirlwind, so this one's going to help you pull your enemies towards you. That's just super useful. There are other aspects that'll be useful, but that one is the best one for it because the grasping Whirlwind is just great for getting everyone close to you so that you can, you know, mop them all up. For your gloves, the aspect of Berserk Ripping. Whenever you deal direct damage while berserking, inflict 20 to 30% of the base damage dealt as additional bleeding damage over 5 seconds. That one's going to give you some bleed, but it's going to be great for dealing additional damage. For our offhand weapon, Edgemaster's Aspect, skills deal up to 10 to 20% increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast, receiving the maximum benefit when you have full primary resource. For our amulet, Aspect of Disobedience, so you gain 0.25 to 0.5% increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 25 to 50% of damage. So that one is one that definitely stacks the more armor you have, and that of course helps if you've slotted skulls on all your jewelry because your armor can get ridiculous. You can see on this build I've got 4200 armor, which is pretty decent, and so that one can give you 25 to 50% increased damage for, or damage reduction, or armor I should say, for the damage that you've dealt, so it's super useful. For our ring, we're going to want the Bold Chieftain's Aspect, so whenever you cast a shout skill, its cooldown is reduced to 1 to 1.9 seconds per nearby enemy, up to a maximum of 6 seconds, so that one's just going to help shout skill cooldown get reduced, which is very, very useful. Ring number 2 is our Aspect of Echoing Fury is what we're going to want, ideally, and so that one just says your shout skills generate 2 to 4 fury per second while active. It's just going to help us generate more fury. Our main hand one-handed weapon, if you can get it, Aspect of the Expectant, attacking enemies with your basic skill increases the damage of your next core skills cast by 5 to 10% up to 30%, just another useful damage increase. For our legs, if you can get Aspect of Might on there, it's going to give you basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for 2 to 6 seconds, so another damage reduction skill increase. One of our key ones is going to be the Aspect of Dire Whirlwind. We're going to want that on our two-handed weapon, the main one that you use for these, and so that one says Whirlwind's critical strike chance is increased by 3 to 8% for each second it is channeled, up to 9 to 24%, so that's going to give us a huge critical strike chance increase. For our other two-handed weapon, we want to do Aspect of Limitless Rage, so each point of fury you generate while at maximum fury grants your next core skill 1 to 2% increased damage, up to 15 to 30%. For our boots, if we can get our Relentless Berserker's Aspect, so your lucky hit damaging an enemy with a core skill has up to a 22 to 40% chance to extend the duration of berserking by 1 second. Double this duration if it was a critical strike, so that one's just going to help us berserk a lot more, which is obviously super useful. And then for our chest, the Steadfast Berserker's Aspect is going to be probably the most useful one. I went through a couple before deciding on this one, but I think that one's probably the one that is going to help the most of this build. So that's another one that's going to help your lucky hit, so you get up to a 35% chance to gain Fortify whenever you deal direct damage while berserking. So another one that's going to stack on top of all of our berserking for this build. And so as far as this build goes, just in general terms, it basically just revolves around snapshotting all of the different buffs that we're going to get, A, from what we're stacking on our armor, and B, from our shouts, and then channeling Whirlwind. And we're going to do that against bosses and larger groups of enemies. Your basic attack is going to be something that you'll find yourself using, obviously, because, you know, it's a build and you're not ever going to achieve 0% up or 100% uptime, no matter how much I've tried. I haven't been able to get it to work on these Barbarian builds, but I've gotten pretty close, and so you'll spend most of your time whirlwinding. But basically, when you go into these situations, the most powerful way to go is just to snap as many of those as possible, and then you just saw through them. It goes so fast. There are very few situations where this doesn't work, and I found with this build, most boss fights are kind of a joke, you know, so it definitely pays off. And like I said, it works well for leveling. I know a lot of people will say builds like this, you gotta wait until you can do it all at once. No, not really. It's obviously most effective if you can do that, but it's not the only way to go. And so just in basic general terms, your essential gameplay loop is going to be as follows. First, you're going to pop your rallying cry and your challenging shout. Then you're going to max out your expectant and your limitless rage. Then you're going to pop war cry, pop Wrath of the Berserker if there's any sort of a large pack or any elites around you, or the boss that you're going after, like at the end of the dungeon, whatever the case is going to be. Then you're going to want to pop Wrath of the Berserker. Then you're going to start channeling Whirlwind, and you're just going to do that over and over and over again, no matter, you know, how you are doing it, who you're coming up against, or where you are. That's the general loop, and it works pretty much in all situations. Like I said, I tried a lot of builds before settling on this one, but that is my Whirlwind Barbarian build, which, like I said, is, in my opinion, the best build for the Barbarian in Diablo IV. So that is all for today's video. Hope you enjoyed this or found it useful or whatever, but that's all for today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you like this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.